My name's Larry, and I'm here today to show you how to properly set up and feed a sluice box. I've been prospecting for over 30 years, and I've seen videos on YouTube where people claim to know what they're doing on how to set one of these up, and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. The way they're setting them up is wrong, and it's costing them in lost gold. If you want to learn how to set one of these up properly, watch the video. I'll show you how and I'll explain why. Okay, a sluice box, they're designed by a specific engineering. Inside a sluice box you have riffles in them. Okay, with the correct water flow and the correct angle, what happens is those riffles, they create a curl effect. Meaning, when you're feeding material through it, if there's any gold in it, which is usually the heaviest substance, it's going to follow that curl and it's going to tuck underneath that riffle. That's the whole design of what a riffle is supposed to do. If you set up a sluice box with the wrong angle, what's going to happen is you're not going to have that curl effect, and your gold is going to ride that current, and it's just going to hop over each riffle until it hops right out your sluice box. Okay, now I've seen a bunch of videos where guys claim to know what they're doing and they think they're teaching you how to operate a sluice box. And they're teaching you wrong, and I'll tell you why. The videos that I've watched, they're setting their sluice box in the river, the whole sluice box. Okay, now if you've watched them and they've actually filmed it long enough, you can see that over time they have to actually use their hand and pull material out of the sluice box. The reason is it starts backing up on them, and they've got to get rid of that material. Other videos, you'll see the same thing. They've got the sluice box in the river, but they're not filming long enough to where you actually see them have to pull that material out. Now let me explain how to properly set one up. Okay, sluice box were designed to be set up with a 1-inch drop for every 1 foot of sluice box. Now what that equates to is, I use a 50-inch sluice box, which is basically 4 feet. Okay, with a 1-inch drop for every foot of sluice box, in order for this to function properly, I have to have a 4-inch drop between here and where it exits the sluice box. And as you can see here, I've got this end set up at 5 inches from the ground, and this end is set up 9 inches from the ground, which is a 4-inch drop. That's the proper angle to set this up. Okay, now when you set up a sluice box, you normally have to drop your flare only about a 1/2 inch below the surface to give you enough water for your sluice box to function properly. However, and this isn't what you're seeing on YouTube, is this end has to remain out of the water in order for that sluice box to work properly. If you have any of this end going back underneath the surface, what's going to happen is that current in the river comes around and then it creates a curl back into the sluice box, and it stops this end of the sluice box from being cleaned out. And what's going to happen is you're going to have material keep building up on this end of your sluice box. Now, just as another example, if you got this set a 1/2 inch below the surface and you found a steep enough drop in a 4-foot section of the river, but let's say you had this much of your sluice box remaining underwater, what's going to happen is from here to the end of your sluice box, It's going to create that backflow, and this whole end of your sluice box is going to keep building up material. The more you feed it, it's just going to keep rising, rising, and rising. And what you're not seeing on these videos is these guys have to reach in there with their hand and pull that material out. That's how much material will back up in your sluice box if this is underwater. You have to have this out of the water in order for it to function properly. Now, I shot a couple of videos last year when I was out prospecting, and what I want you to look at right now, there's 2 clips, and if you look at the first clip, you'll see that I found a 5-inch drop in the river in a 4-foot span where I could get my 1/2 inch here, and this is still out of the water. That's what you want. And if you look at the next clip, I was in a small creek, and what I had to actually do, if you look at it, you'll see I had to build me a small dam. It only took me about 15 minutes to build this dam, but that allowed me to get my 4-inch drop with this remaining out of the water. So go ahead and watch those 2 clips, and don't be shy to use your pause button if you have to, just to look at and see that I've got the angle, but this is out of the water. So go ahead and watch those 2 clips, and then we'll go ahead and continue after that. I already got 3 buckets of material. There's 1, there's 2, and if you come over here, there's the 3rd one. There's the sluice box set up in the stream. Now I'm going to run all 3 buckets of material through it, see what I come up with. There ain't no real safe for me to set up the tripod to film this, so I'm just going to go ahead and shut the camera off and go to work. Got my sluice box set up, but as you can see, I had to make a little dam because there wasn't enough water coming through for the sluice box. Now, like I said, okay, now that you've watched those clips, you need to understand if you're going to set one up, you have to have this out of the water. If you don't, you're going to get that buildup here. You're going to have to pull it out with your hand. And if you have to pull that material out with your hand, you're pulling out gold with it if you're in a gold-bearing river. You need that sluice box for it to function the way it was designed to function if you want to go home with gold. If you don't want to go home with gold, set it up wrong, go out and bust your butt off and waste your time. Okay, now that I've explained that to you, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to pull this flare off, and I'm going to go ahead and install a power head on it, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to teach you how to feed a sluice box properly. I've seen on YouTube a whole lot of people doing that wrong too. You need to learn how to do that properly, because if you don't, it's going to cost you in lost gold. So let me go ahead and get that changed. I'll get the camera reset up, and then I'll come back and give you that lesson. See you in a minute. As you can see, I've pulled the flare off of my sluice box, and I put the power head on it. And now I'm going to show you how to feed a sluice box. There's 2 wrong ways to feed a sluice box and 1 right way to feed a sluice box. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, let me explain to you how a sluice box works. When you feed the material into the box, you want it to achieve a state that's called liquefaction as soon as possible. Okay, what liquefaction means is water surrounds each separate particulate of soil or matter. Therefore, no 2 grains of sand or soil or whatever are touching each other. They're separated by water. Okay, when your material reaches this liquefaction state, the gold drops out of it. So therefore, you want the material you're feeding to reach that liquefaction state at the front of your flare. If you're feeding it too fast or too large amounts at a time, it's going to go halfway down or to the end of your sluice box before it reaches that liquefaction and the gold drops out of it. You need it to reach that liquefaction state up here as soon as possible. Now the first sample I'm going to give you on YouTube, I see a lot of people doing this. Okay, a sluice box, what you want to do is feed it real quick to completely saturate your miner's moss with material. Okay, after it's completely loaded up, after that state, you don't want to overfeed it and you don't want to underfeed it. But I'm just going to go ahead and start up front and show you what I've seen on YouTube, how people are underfeeding the sluice box. Another thing you got to remember is the more material you can process, the more gold you're going to go home with. So if you're just processing a small amount and you're doing it slow, you're going to end up with less gold. You want to process your material as fast as possible, but not overfeed it. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in, get some water running, and I'll go ahead and show you what I've seen on YouTube of which is wrong. Okay, what I've seen on YouTube is people feeding their sluice box like this. They're just sitting here doing this, which if you're doing this, you are underfeeding the sluice box. Okay, what happens if you're underfeeding it, it's always undercutting the material in your miner's moss, and it'll actually wash that gold out. You can't sit here and feed a box like this. For one, like I say, you want to feed it as fast as you can, because the more material you process, the more gold you're going to go home with. You can sit here all day and do this, and it's going to be wrong to begin with, and you don't want to do it this way. Okay, now the next, so that's the first wrong way. You don't want to underfeed a sluice box. This is absolutely wrong. Okay, the next way, you don't want to overfeed a sluice box, meaning you don't want to do this. When you start doing that, you're overfeeding it. That is completely overfeeding the sluice box. And what happens is a lot of times that material, feeding it like that, the material won't reach that liquefaction state. It waits till it gets down to the end. Now this stuff's dried out. If it was wet like you pulled it out of the river, it'd be clumpy. But that's the wrong way to feed a sluice box. And I'm going to show you why. I'll reset the camera position up at the very end of the sluice box, and you'll see what happens at the end of the sluice box when I feed it this way. So I'll go ahead and reset the camera up and show you what happens when you overfeed it. Okay, now what I want you to look at is look at the end of the sluice box when I feed a whole shovelful in. Watch what happens at the end of the sluice box. You'll see it bulge up. See right there how it's bulging up? If you're feeding it fast enough where you're seeing that bulge on the end of your sluice box, that's too fast. See how it's changing the current? See how it's bubbling over? Now I'll let it calm down a little bit. because there's too much material in the box. Let it wash out for a second. And you'll see how the end of the sluice box levels out. Now with it leveled out, you can see how it's smoothed out at the end. Now, this is about the rate that you want to feed a sluice box. You'll see that the end of the sluice box isn't flaring up. The material is pretty much reaching liquefaction right up here at the end. And the end of the sluice box is nice and smooth. As long as you see that ripple on the end of your box not bulging up, you're not overfeeding it. Now, I don't know how well the camera picks it up. You can see the whole sluice box has got material over the miner's moss. But the end of the sluice box isn't flaring up. Now, normally what I do is when I get on a river, I'll fill 4 full buckets of material up out of 4 different holes. Then I'll set my sluice box up. Once I set the sluice box up, I'll run 4 whole buckets of material just as fast as I can, like this. And I won't stop. I just keep feeding it. Like I say, that's not overfeeding it, and it's not underfeeding it. It's hitting that liquefaction state, and it's letting any gold in there drop out. Now I'll go ahead and shut the water off, and I'll readjust the camera and show you what the sluice box looks like. Now you can see at the end of the sluice box, zoom in a little bit here, you can actually see the miner's moss underneath the Hungarian grates. And you see those grates, and your miner's moss is underneath it. You see the riffles. Now up here at the top, you can see more of the miner's moss, and you see the material build up in the middle of the sluice box. The reason that does that is that power head diverts more water to the sides, and it's not putting enough water flow to the middle of the box, so I'm getting a buildup of material in the center of the box. When you've got your flare on it and you're using it in a river, you have a nice even flow all the way across, and you won't get that buildup in the middle because you've got that nice even flow of water all the way across your flare. But like I say, you can see from feeding it the way I was feeding it, that's going to let that gold get trapped. I'm not underfeeding it, I'm not overfeeding it. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to completely clean out my sluice box, and we're going to do a test. I'm going to run 3/4 of a bucket of material as fast as I can, and there's going to be 1 troy ounce of gold in that bucket. There's going to be all the way from nuggets all the way down to real fines. So we're going to do that test, and then after we've run all the material, we're going to dissect the sluice box, and we're going to see exactly where that gold ended up in the sluice box. And we're going to weigh it to see if it captures every bit of it. Like I say, I'll weigh out a full troy ounce before I do the test, and then I'll salt my material with it, and we'll go ahead and run it through, and we'll see exactly where the gold's being caught in this trap. Whether it's in the miner's moss, we'll look underneath each riffle real carefully, see if it's tucked any gold underneath it. And then also, of course, your rib matting up at the front of your sluice box. If you're in a gold-bearing river and feeding material, that's the first place you're going to see gold, is on that ribbed matting. So go ahead and check the next video out. It'll be a little bit more exciting than this one. But now you know how to properly set up a sluice box. You need that 4-inch drop, and you know how to feed a sluice box. You don't want to underfeed it, because it will undercut your material in your miner's moss and blow out the gold. And you don't want to overfeed it, because you're not going to reach that liquefaction state before it drops out of the box. So we'll go ahead and see you next time. It'll be a little bit more interesting. See you then.